The autumn wind howled through the cemetery, sharp and unforgiving, tugging at the yellowed leaves that clung desperately to gnarled trees. Katy stood alone, her thin coat offering little protection against the chill that seeped into her bones. Her eyes red from crying, followed the slow descent of her grandmother, Maria's coffin, into the cold earth. Each tear that fell seemed to freeze on her cheeks, leaving a prickling sting that mirrored the ache in her heart. Maria had been more than a grandmother. She'd been Katie's anchor, her guide, her confidant, filling the roles of mother, father, and best friend. Now with her gone, the world felt vast and empty, and Katie was adrift, a solitary figure in a sea of grief across the cemetery. Her sister Lena stood like a shadow from another life. Tall poised her elegant black suit, impeccable against the somber backdrop. She looked less like a grieving granddaughter and more like a corporate executive, her presence polished. And detached Lena had left their small provincial town years ago, chasing ambition in a distant city where she'd carved out a glittering career. Her visits home had dwindled to rare fleeting appearances, each one underscoring the growing distance between the sisters. Lena was fire and drive, always reaching for the next rung on the ladder of success. Katie was quiet, introspective content with the simple rhythms of life. Their differences had once been a source of playful teasing, but now they formed a chasm deep and unbridgeable, as cold as the autumn air around them, as the sparse crowd of mourners began to disperse their footsteps, crunching on the gravel path. Lena approached Katie, her eyes sharp and unreadable, avoided Katie's tear-streaked face, focusing instead on some distant point. "I have to leave today," Lena said, her voice clipped, businesslike works piling up. "You know how it is." Katie nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I understand," she managed to whisper, though. The words felt hollow. "The will is being read tomorrow, at the notary's office. Be there." Lena's tone was final, and without waiting for a response, she turned and strode toward her car, a sleek, gleaming machine that stood out like a beacon of modernity in the cemetery's bleak landscape. Katie watched her go, her heart sinking further. The sight of Lena's retreating figure only deepened her sense of abandonment, as if the last threads connecting her to family were fraying before her eyes. The next day, the notary's office was a claustrophobic box of stale air and tension. Katie sat stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap, while her husband Igor loomed behind her, his presence heavy with disapproval. Igor had never hidden his disdain for grandmother Maria, dismissing her as a relic of a bygone era. Her stories of wartime struggles and her cluttered old house filled with useless junk and irritation he couldn't abide to him. Maria's attachment to the past was a flaw, and Katie's quiet devotion to her grandmother was a source of constant frustration. The notary, an older man with a weary expression, cleared his throat and began reading Maria's will. Lena was bequeathed a stunning seaside cottage, a dream property that perfectly suited her glamorous aspirations. Katie, however, inherited Maria's ancient Volga, a rusty, dilapidated car that hadn't moved from the garage in years. The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal, broken only by the faint rustle of the notary's papers. Lena's eyebrows shot up, a mix of surprise and smug satisfaction flickering across her face. Igor let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "This is absurd!" Igor exploded, stepping forward, his face flushed with anger. "She gets a beach house, and Katie stuck with that worthless pile of scrap metal. There's got to be a mistake." The notary adjusted his glasses, unruffled. "This is the deceased's final wish. Everything is legally documented and binding." Lena's lips curled into a condescending smile. "I'm thrilled about the cottage, of course," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But that Volga, it's practically a joke. Grandma must have been out of her mind." Katie sat in stunned silence, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Why had Maria made this choice? The Volga was a relic, its paint chipped and faded, its body pockmarked with rust in her childhood. Katie had loved listening to Maria's stories about the car tales of dusty roads and secret errands, but those memories felt like fragments of a dream, distant and half forgotten. What was her grandmother trying to tell her through this strange bequest back home? Igor's rage boiled over in their cramped living room. He unleashed a torrent of venom, his words cutting deeper than any autumn wind. "You're useless, Katie!" he shouted, grabbing her shoulders, his fingers digging into her skin. "You can't even inherit something worth a damn. Who needs that rusted-out wreck?" Katie tried to protest, her voice trembling. "It's not my fault, Igor. I didn't ask for this." But Igor was deaf to her, pleas consumed by greed and fury. "Pack your things and get out!" he roared, shoving her toward the door. "You're nothing to me anymore." The words hit like a physical blow. Katie stood frozen, disbelief washing over her, after years of marriage, of enduring Igor's moods, his criticisms, his control. How could he cast her aside so easily? "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't care." "Nay." Igor snapped his eyes, cold sleep on the street. "For all I care, I'm done with you." With a single suitcase in hand, Katie stumbled into the dusk, the world blurring through her tears. The town she'd known all her life felt foreign. Now its familiar streets cold and unwelcoming. Her feet, almost of their own accord, led her to the old garage, where the Volga stood. The car was a sorry sight, its once proud frame sagging under years of neglect, its surface marred by rust and peeling paint. Katie ran her hand over the cold metal, and a memory stirred Maria's voice, warm and steady. "This car is more than just metal. Katie, it holds secrets, stories, a piece of our history." Fumbling in her coat pocket, she found the car keys tucked inside an envelope with a note in Maria's elegant, slightly trembling handwriting. "This is for you, my dear. Don't be afraid." Katie clutched the keys, whispering, "Don't be afraid." As a spark of resolve flickered within her, Maria had believed in her, trusted her, with something greater than a mere car. Whatever lay ahead, Katie would face it with the strength her grandmother had seen in her. Her hands trembled, not just from the biting cold, but from a mix of fear and anticipation as she approached the trunk. The hinges groaned as she lifted the lid, revealing a dark, dusty interior. The air inside carried a faint, familiar scent of old rubber oil, and something deeper, like the echo of Maria's warm embrace. Katie pulled out her phone, its flashlight casting a pale glow into the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat. Nestled in the trunk was a worn leather bag, its surface soft and weathered, as if it had been touched by countless hands over decades. Beside it sat a small, heavy metal safe, its surface dull but sturdy, and atop it a folded piece of paper. Katie's heart pounded as she reached for the bag first. The leather was supple, almost warm, as if it carried the memory of those who'd handled it before. Unzipping it, she gasped. Inside were dozens of black and white photographs, their edges frayed, their images faded but alive with history. Young men and women in wartime uniforms stared back at her, some with weary eyes, others with faint, defiant smiles. They stood amid bombed-out ruins, leaned against tanks, or held rifles with steady hands. On the backs of some photos, hurried inscriptions told fragments of their stories. Mishaina, Kolia, comrades at the front. Nadezhda, eternal memory. Tucked among the photos were brittle documents, commendations praising Maria's selfless work during the war. Hand-drawn maps with cryptic red circles marking unknown locations, and letters folded with care. Their ink faded but legible. Katie didn't yet understand their significance, but she felt the weight of a hidden truth, a secret Maria had guarded through decades of silence. Her hands shook as she turned to the metal safe. Its combination, lock unyielding under her fingers. She hadn't found a key, and no amount of force would budge it. Setting it aside, she unfolded the paper, a letter in Maria's familiar script, its rounded letters trembling slightly, as if written in haste. "My dearest Katya, if you're reading this, I'm no longer by your side. Don't fear what you find in this car. It's not just an old relic, it's a vessel of memory, a testament to those who gave everything for our homeland. Inside the safe is gold hidden from the Nazis during the war, used to save countless lives. Now it belongs to you. Decide its fate, but know this. Its true worth lies not in its shine, but in the stories it carries. And a word of caution, don't trust Lena. She's always chased wealth and status, blind to the deeper meaning of what I've left you. This is yours alone. Be brave. Katie sank to her knees beside the car, clutching the letter to her chest as tears spilled over her grandmother, so quiet and unassuming in life, had been a heroine, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of history. It was almost too much to comprehend, like stepping into a story that belonged to someone else. She stared at the safe, its contents, a mystery gold. Why had Maria entrusted it to her? Not Lena, who seemed so much more capable, so much more confident. What was Katie supposed to do with this legacy? Then she remembered the diary. Maria's note had mentioned it. You'll find my diary in the car. Read it. It holds the answers. Katie dove back into the trunk, her fingers sifting through photos and papers until they brushed something solid beneath the spare tire. A small leather-bound notebook, its cover worn but intact. She climbed into the Volga's driver's seat, the cold leather creaking under her weight, and opened the first page under the dim glow of her phone. 1941. War, fear, devastation. But we will not surrender. We'll fight for our homeland until our last breath. The words pulled Katie into a world she'd never known, Maria's diary chronicled. Her life as a partisan courier, slipping through enemy lines to deliver messages, hiding refugees in secret safe houses, procuring weapons and medicine under the cover of night. Each entry was a testament to her courage, her resolve, her unshakable belief in freedom. Katie read spellbound, discovering a grandmother she'd never fully understood, a woman who faced death daily with a fire in her heart. One entry about the gold stopped her cold before the war. A wealthy merchant, sensing the coming darkness, had entrusted Maria with a cache of gold coins and bars meant to be safeguarded. Until better times, he died in battle, leaving Maria as the gold's keeper. She used it to fund the resistance, bribing traitors, freeing prisoners, saving lives. This gold isn't mine. Maria wrote, I'm its keeper, entrusted to ensure it serves our people, our homeland when the time comes. Katie read late into the night, the car's dim interior. Her only shelter from the world outside the diary revealed Maria's sacrifices, her family's resilience, the war's brutal toll. It was a window into a life of quiet heroism, of choices made under impossible circumstances. Maria's trust in Katie felt like both a gift and a burden. Why her? What was she to do with this legacy? How could she honor it? And how could she face Lena, who dismissed their grandmother's memory with such casual disdain? Exhausted but resolute, Katie knew she couldn't betray Maria's trust. The next morning, she began calling local museums, her hands trembling as she dialed. Their small town had only two, a local history museum and an art museum. The art museum's receptionist listened politely before redirecting her to the history. As the first light of morning crept through the dusty garage windows, Katie remained seated behind the wheel of the old Volga, once dismissed as worthless, now a sacred space of discovery. Around her lay the war-stained photographs, the faded letters, Maria's weathered diary, and the unopened safe still heavy with secrets. But the greatest treasure was not gold or documents. It was clarity, a transformation. The quiet realization that her grandmother had not merely left her a car, but had handed her the truth that resilience lives in the ordinary, and strength is not always loud. Katie had spent years shrinking herself to accommodate others, her controlling husband, her condescending sister, society's expectations. She had been told she was meek, irrelevant, second best. But Maria saw something more. She had trusted Katie with a legacy meant not for someone polished or ambitious like Lena, but for someone who understood the weight of memory, of sacrifice, of quiet dignity. Through that trust, Katie came to understand that what you inherit is not as important as how you carry it. The biggest lesson she learned was this: silence does not equal weakness. Sometimes it is the foundation of the strongest kind of courage. Katie had endured judgment, abandonment, and betrayal. But she did not break. She chose not to lash out, not to beg for recognition, but to walk a different path. And in doing so, she reclaimed her worth not through revenge, but through revelation. Maria's story, hidden in that rusted vehicle, taught Katie that history is not preserved through monuments, but through those willing to remember and retell it. That gold may glitter, but it is the lives it saved that shine the brightest. And perhaps, most powerfully, Katie learned that legacy is not just about bloodlines or belongings, it is about courage passed from one heartbeat to the next. She had no idea what would happen when she called the local museum. Would they believe her? Would they honor her grandmother's story? Would the safe finally be opened, revealing one last truth? Katie did not know, but for the first time in her life, she was no longer afraid of the unknown. So,